There's a boy in the girls' bathroom, starting on chapter 28. Bradley lay on his bed, on his stomach. He chewed the end of his pencil as he looked hopelessly at the arithmetic book opened in front of him. Next to the book was a piece of paper. In the upper right-hand corner he had written, Bradley Chalkers, homework, arithmetic, page 43, Red Hill School, room 12, Mrs. Ebble's class, last seat, last row, black eye. His handwriting, which was messy anyhow, was made worse by the fact that he wrote with a dull pencil on top of a soft bed. He had stayed in Mrs. Ebble's class as long as he could after the bell rang. Bradley, it's time to go home, Mrs. Ebble finally said to him. He looked outside, unsure if Jeff and his gang of bullies were waiting for him. I have a question, he said. Mrs. Ebble eyed him suspiciously. What kind of question? He tried to figure out what kind of question he had. An asking question. I see, said Mrs. Ebble. May I ask it? He asked. Okay, she said reluctantly. He asked his question. What page is the homework on? The homework? Page 43. He wrote 43 on the top of his sneaker so he wouldn't forget. Then he took his arithmetic book and stepped outside. Jeff and his friends were playing basketball. He ran home. Now he looked hopelessly at page 43, shook his head and sighed. Question 1. What is 3/4 of 2/3? It was the most impossible question he'd ever seen. His mind wandered. Hey, Bradley, what are you doing? Asked Ronnie. Homework. What's homework? She asked. It's work you do at home. Is that supposed to be funny? She asked. No, really. That's what they do at school. They give you work to do at home and they call it homework. You've never done it before, said Ronnie. I'm doing it for Carla. Now leave me alone so I can concentrate. Question 1. What is 3/4 of 2/3? Why are you doing it for Carla? Ronnie asked. He sighed. Okay, I'll tell you, but you can't tell anyone. Ronnie promised not to tell. We're in love. Really? Exclaimed Ronnie. How do you know? She kissed me. Ooh, that means she loves you, said Ronnie. Are you going to marry her? Maybe, when I'm older. First, I have to do my homework. I'm going to marry Bartholomew, said Ronnie. I know, said Bradley. Now let me do my homework. Question 1. What is 3/4 of 2/3? Hey, Bradley, what's going on? Asked Bartholomew. Leave him alone, said Ronnie. He's trying to do his homework. He can't concentrate when you're talking to him. Maybe I can help, said Bartholomew. What's the problem? What is 3/4 of 2/3? Bradley asked. 3/4 of 2/3, Bartholomew repeated. That's a tough problem, all right. 3/4 of 2/3. Let's see. You divide 4 into... No, you multiply 2 times... No. Of means divide, said the donkey. Like if you take half of something, it means you divide by 2. You divide 3 by 2 and 4 by 3. Bradley started to write that down. No, of means times, said the lion. You have to multiply everything. First, you have to reverse the denominators, said the fox. You don't reverse, you inverse, corrected the mother cocker spaniel. I think you have to find a common denominator, said the elephant. Not for multiplication, said the hippopotamus. That's only for addition. Multiplication is the same as addition, said the fox, only faster. You cancel out the 3s, said the kangaroo. You always cancel out 3s. You multiply the 3s, said the lion. Bradley kept erasing and rewriting until there was nothing but a big black smudge covering his paper. On top of the smudge, he tried to write 3 times 3 equals 9, but as he did so, his pencil tore a hole through the paper. The answer can't be 9, said Ronnie. If you start out with fractions, you have to end up with fractions. Bradley slammed the book shut. None of you know what you're talking about, he cried out in disgust. He took the book, paper, and pencil and walked down the hall to the dining room. His mother was sitting at the table working a crossword puzzle from the newspaper. He plopped down next to her and sighed. She looked at him inquisitively. I can't figure out how to do my homework, he complained. Will you help me? His mother smiled. I'd be delighted. Let me see. He pushed his arithmetic book in front of her. Page 43. She opened the book to the page that looked at Bradley's torn, smudged paper. Okay, first let me clear away this newspaper so we can have a nice, neat place to work. While I do that, I want you to get a clean sheet of paper. I don't have any more paper. This is all I brought home. There's some paper in your father's desk. Get a sharp pencil, too. He looked at her in disbelief. He wasn't allowed to touch anything on his father's desk. She nodded. Bradley felt a little scared as he walked into the extra bedroom which his father used as an office. He opened the top drawer of the old oak desk and carefully took out a pencil and a piece of paper. He shut the drawer, looked around, then hurried back to his mother. She smiled at him. He sat down and wrote, much neater this time. Bradley Chalkers, homework, arithmetic, page 43, Red Hill School, room 12, Mrs. Ebble's class, last seat, last row, black eye. You have to put all that, he explained, in case it gets lost. She read the first question aloud. What is 3/4 of 2/3? He shrugged. Okay, she said, the first thing you want to do is write the equation. He still didn't know what to do. She wrote it for him. 3/4 times 2/3 equals... Whenever you see the word of, it means you multiply, she explained. Of means times, he said. Right, said his mother. That was what the lion had said. Now you can cancel out the 3s, said his mother. That was what the kangaroo had said. You always cancel out 3s. Neither of them noticed that Claudia was standing behind them, watching. That's not how you're supposed to learn, she said abruptly. Bradley turned around and glared at her. You have to explain why you cancel them, said Claudia. And they don't call it canceling. It's called dividing by 1. I just know the way I learned it, said Mrs. Chalkers. If you want, I can show you, Bradley, said Claudia. He looked at his mother, then back at Claudia, then at his mother. She knows the way they're teaching it now, said his mother. You'll help me? Bradley asked his sister. Sure, why not? I got nothing better to do. Mrs. Chalkers stood up, and Claudia took her place. Don't do it for him, said Bradley's mother. Make sure he knows how to do it himself. Claudia worked patiently with Bradley for the rest of the afternoon. When he said he understood something, she made him explain it to her. That was harder. He understood it when she did it, but then he had trouble when he tried to do it himself. By dinner time, they were only a little more than halfway through. Bradley wanted Claudia to help him after dinner too, but she had her own homework to do. You know how to do it, she told him. You can do it by yourself. I need help, he complained. I'll help you, said his father. You will? Let's go to my office. We can work at my desk. Bradley couldn't believe it. They worked together. Bradley was surprised by how much his father knew. He made all the hard points seem easy. Bradley was a little disappointed by how quickly they finished. He had liked working with his father. He brought his homework back to his room. Oh, I get it, Bradley, said Bartholomew. You multiply the numerators and denominators separately, but I still don't understand reducing. It's easy, said Bradley. Here, let me show you again. Chapter 29. Bradley was too excited to sleep. Mrs. Ebble will be so surprised, he thought. She'll tell the whole class only one person got 100%, Bradley. But there were so many things that could still go wrong. What if I lose it on the way to school? He worried. What if Jeff and his friends steal it? Twice during the night, he got out of bed to make sure it was safely folded inside his arithmetic book. What if I did the wrong page? He was no longer sure whether Mrs. Abel had said page 43 or page 62. He tried to remember exactly what she said to him. He sat up in horror. She never said it was arithmetic homework. Mrs. Ebel had just said a page number. She never said what book. She could have meant his history or language or any of his other books. He lay back down and trembled. His tears wet his pillow. He got out of bed early in the morning, checking to see if his homework was still there, then quickly got ready and left for school without eating breakfast. On the way, he stopped to make sure he still had his homework. As he opened his book, the paper fell onto the sidewalk right next to a puddle of water. He stared at it, horrified by what he had almost done, then quickly picked it up and placed it back in his book. He held the book tightly shut the rest of the way to school. He was one of the first ones there. He had to wait for the doors to open. He kept on the lookout for Jeff and his gang. He stood with his back to the school wall so they couldn't sneak up behind him. He saw Andy. He thought Andy had seen him too, but if he had, he didn't do anything about it. When the doors opened, he was the first one in Mrs. Ebel's class. He sat at his desk, last seat, last row, and waited. As the other kids came in, he saw them put sheets of paper on Mrs. Ebel's desk. He wondered if that was their homework. He now had a new worry. He didn't know how he was supposed to turn in his homework. Jeff entered, placed a piece of paper on the pile on top of Mrs. Ebel's desk, then came toward the back of the room. It must be his homework, thought Bradley. What else could it be? Sean, he said out loud. The girl who sat in front of Jeff turned around. Are you supposed to put your homework on Mrs. Ebel's desk? Don't tell me what to do, Bradley, Sean snapped. You worry about your homework and I'll worry about mine, okay? She turned back around. It was almost time for school to start. What if I have to put it on her desk before the bell rings or it doesn't count? He fumbled through his book for his homework, stood up, then headed for Mrs. Ebel's desk. He became more nervous with each step he took. His mouth was dry, and he had trouble breathing. He could hardly see where he was going. He felt like he was going to faint. Mrs. Ebble's desk seemed so far away. It was like he looked at it through the wrong end of a telescope. His heart pounded and his homework rattled in his hand. Somehow he made it to her desk and tried to focus on the sheets of paper the other kids had put there. It looked like arithmetic homework, page 43. But instead of feeling better, he felt worse, like he was going to explode. "Do you want something, Bradley?" asked Mrs. Ebble. He looked at his homework, shaking his hand. Then he tore it in half and dropped it in the wastepaper basket next to Mrs. Ebble's desk. He instantly felt better. His head cleared and his breathing returned to normal. His heart stopped pounding. He walked back to his desk, took a deep breath, exhaled, and sat down. He folded his arms on his desktop and lay his head down sideways across them. He felt sad but relieved as he gazed at the gold stars. Chapter 30. Bradley remained in his seat after everyone else had gone out to recess. He walked to Mrs. Ebble's desk. She was sorting papers. "Mrs. Ebble," he said timidly, "may I use the hall pass? I have to see the counselor." She looked up. "Please." Normally, Mrs. Ebble would never allow Bradley Chalkers loose in the halls, but something about the way he asked must have changed her mind. "All right, Bradley," she said, then caught herself. "But if you're bad, you'll never be allowed in the halls of this school again." "Thank you." He took the hall pass off the hook behind her desk and headed out the door. "You're welcome," Mrs. Ebble said to herself. He knocked on the door to Carla's office. "How nice to see you today, Bradley," she greeted him. "I appreciate your coming to see me." He shook her hand, then they sat around the round table. She was wearing the shirt with the squiggles on it. It was the one she wore the first time he saw her. He liked it, but not as much as the one with mice. "I did my homework last night," he said. Carla beamed. "I'm so proud of—" "I ripped it up." "What?" "I ripped it up. I brought it to school, and I was just about to put it on Mrs. Ebble's desk, but then I ripped it up." "Why did—" Carla started to ask. "Why did I rip it up?" he asked her first. "I don't know. Why did you?" He shrugged. She shrugged. They both giggled. "I was afraid you'd be mad," Bradley said when he stopped giggling. Carla shook her head. "You did your homework. That's the important thing. I'm so very proud of you, Bradley Chalkers." "I'm going to do all my homework from now on," he promised. "That's wonderful. But what if I keep ripping it up?" he asked. "Why would you want to do that?" "I don't know. I didn't think I wanted to rip it up today." "The main thing is that you did it, and you learned some things by doing it, didn't you?" "What of means," said Bradley. "What of means?" Carla repeated. "Times," said Bradley. She stared at him, baffled. "Oh, right," she said, as if it suddenly all connected for her. "Okay, so even though you ripped up your homework, you still remember what you learned. You didn't rip up your memory. And when Mrs. Ebble gives the next arithmetic test, you'll know how to answer the questions." "If they don't change the rules," said Bradley. "What rules? Like, what if they decide that of means subtraction?" "They won't change the rules," Carla assured him, whoever they are. "But what if I rip up my test, too?" he asked. Carla looked at him as if he was being silly. "Has Mrs. Ebble given you any homework for tomorrow?" she asked. "Tomorrow's Saturday." "Okay, for Monday?" "No, we never have homework over the weekend." He spoke like an expert, like he'd been doing homework for years. "But we have a book report due next week, only—" "Only what?" "I don't have a book, and Mrs. Wilcott won't let me check out any from the library." "Well, let's see," said Carla. "Do you think you might know somebody else who might let you borrow a book? Think hard now." Bradley looked around at all the books in her office. "May I borrow one of yours?" he asked. "Please, I won't scribble in it." Carla walked around the table, then picked out a book from a stack on top of one of her bookcases. "It's my favorite," she said as she gave it to Bradley. He read the title and laughed. "My Parents Didn't Steal an Elephant" by Uriah C. Lasso. He opened to page 1 and read the first sentence. "I hate tomato juice." He thought that was a funny sentence to start a book. He continued reading. "Every morning, Aunt Ruth gives me a glass of tomato juice, and every morning I tell her I hate it. 'Fine, Dumpling,' she always says, 'don't drink it.' She calls me Dumpling. Uncle Boris calls me Cornflake. They're crazy. One of these days I'm afraid they're going to try to eat me." He glanced up at Carla, then returned to the book. "My parents are in jail. They got arrested for stealing an elephant from the circus. Only they didn't do it. If they stole an elephant, I'd know about it, wouldn't I? I mean, if your parents stole an elephant, don't you think you'd know about it?" "I think the elephant just ran away. Her master was always mean to her. He whipped her and made her do stupid tricks. My parents used to complain about that a lot. That's why everyone thinks they stole her. So anyway, that's why I have to live with my crazy Aunt Ruth and Uncle Boris. If you ask me, they belong in the circus. They're crazy. Uncle Boris always smokes a cigar. It just hangs out of the corner of his mouth. Whenever he kisses my aunt, he swings the cigar out of the way with his tongue and kisses her out of the side of his mouth. I bet you think Aunt Ruth doesn't like it when he kisses her that way. Wrong, she always laughs when he does it. Sometimes she smokes a cigar too. I told you they were crazy. Look, he even smokes a cigar while he's drinking tomato juice. The bell rang. Bradley was amazed by how quickly the time had passed. Do you want to have lunch together again? He asked. I'm sorry, I'm having lunch with the president of the school board, said Carla. I'd much rather eat lunch with you. He didn't mind too much. At least he had her book to read. They shook hands, then he walked back to class. He placed the hall pass back on the hook and took his seat. He knew he'd write a good book report because he had such a good book to read. I just hope I don't rip it up. Chapter 31. What you doing, Bradley? Asked Ronnie. He's reading, Bartholomew replied nastily. He says he doesn't want to be disturbed. He thinks he's too good for us now that he does his homework. Oh, be quiet and let him read if that's what he wants to do, said Ronnie. Thanks, Ronnie, said Bradley. I knew you'd understand. I knew you'd understand, mimicked Bartholomew. Ronnie understood. She knew about Carla. Bradley returned to his book. Uncle Boris and Aunt Ruth are married. I bet you thought you already knew that, except you're not as smart as you think you are. They were my uncle and aunt even before they got married. Uncle Boris is my mother's brother, and Aunt Ruth is my father's sister. They didn't even know each other until my parents got arrested for stealing the elephant. Then they both came here to take care of me. Ha! They fell in love and got married a week later. It was sickening. You're lucky you weren't there. I've been cheated out of an aunt and an uncle. If they had married somebody else, then I'd have 2 aunts and 2 uncles. Now I only have 1 aunt and 1 uncle. I wonder what happened to the aunt and uncle I don't have. I wonder if they married each other too. Bradley looked up. He tried to make sense of that last paragraph. It made him think. A lot of parts of the book made him think. That was one of the things he liked about it. They made him think about his father too, and why the man who shot him wasn't in jail. There was a knock on the door. His mother entered holding a piece of paper. Oh, you're reading, she said. That's good. It's a good book, he replied. I just got this letter from the Concerned Parents Organization, she said. There's going to be some sort of meeting about Miss Davis, your counselor. Bradley's heart fluttered. It says if I have any complaints, I should come to the meeting. She shrugged her shoulders. I don't think I have any complaints. She seems to be helping you. Do you have any complaints? Oh, no, he doesn't have any complaints, Claudia laughed, coming in behind her mother. He's in love with her. I heard him say it to his animals. What? Bradley exclaimed in a very high voice. Claudia snickered. Look, Mom, he's blushing. That proves he loves her. Bradley wished he could crawl under his bed and hide. It doesn't prove anything, said Mrs. Chalkers. Quit teasing your brother. Where'd you get the book, Bradley? Claudia asked like she already knew the answer. His heart was beating very fast. Carla gave it to me. Carla gave it to him, Claudia repeated. Well, I don't care where he got the book, said Mrs. Chalkers. I'm just happy to see he's reading. The only reason he's reading is because he's in love with his teacher, said Claudia. She's not my teacher, she's my counselor, said Bradley. Claudia roared with laughter. His mother laughed too, but she quickly covered her mouth. I didn't say I was in love with her, Bradley insisted. We were just talking about my counselor, not my teacher, that's all. Are you going to let him marry her, Mom? Asked Claudia. Mrs. Chalkers smiled. Well, I don't know. She seems like a very lovely girl. Bradley felt like he was going to die. His sister was hysterical. So you don't have any complaints about Miss Davis? His mother asked seriously, getting back to the letter. She's okay, he said without emotion. Claudia snickered. Well, then, I won't go to the meeting, said his mother. Come on, let's leave your brother alone. The Concerned Parents Organization never likes anything, said Claudia. They're always causing trouble at my school, too. They want to turn kids into robots. Bradley watched his sister and mother walk out of his room and shut the door behind them. He lay down on his bed. His face was on fire. So, I love her? What's wrong with that? Nothing, said Ronnie. They just don't understand about love. The door opened again. Claudia stuck her face inside and said, If the Concerned Parents Organization ever found out Carla kissed you, she'd be fired for sure. Chapter 32. Bradley paid close attention as Mrs. Ebel taught arithmetic. He nodded his head every time she said something that he already knew. Once he almost raised his hand to answer a question, but he lost his nerve. Somebody else gave the answer he would have given. I knew it, he thought as he nodded his head. He had spent recess in the library reading My Parents Didn't Steal an Elephant by Uriah C. Lasso. When he was leaving the library, Mrs. Wilcox stopped him and said, "You were reading, weren't you?" "Yes." "Good for you, Bradley, good for you." He smiled now as he remembered it. It's because of Carla's book, he thought. The book was his lucky charm. As long as he had it with him, it seemed like nothing could go wrong. His black eye was almost gone, too. When the bell rang for lunch, he put his arithmetic book away, took out his lucky book, and walked to Mrs. Ebel's desk. "May I please borrow the hall pass?" he asked. She let him have it. He knew she would. He was holding the magic book. He walked to Carla's office. Just as he was raising his fist to knock, she opened the door. "Bradley, what a pleasant surprise!" "You want to have lunch together?" he asked. "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I have to go to the principal's office." "What's the matter? Did you get in trouble?" he joked. She didn't laugh at his joke. She shrugged her shoulders, then headed toward the principal's office. Maybe she really did get in trouble, Bradley thought as he watched her go. It's probably because she doesn't believe in rules. She must have broken one without knowing it. I should have warned her. But he wasn't too worried. He couldn't imagine anything bad ever happening to Carla. He walked through the auditorium and outside the playground. He sat down on the steps outside the auditorium and ate his lunch. At least he had her book with him. That was almost as good as eating lunch with her. He didn't read while he ate. He was afraid he might accidentally spill food on the book, even if there were no such things as accidents. Colleen Varigold walked by. "Hello, Colleen," he called to her. She stopped and looked at him oddly, then walked away without returning his hello. Bradley didn't mind. He had said hello to Colleen because he knew Carla would appreciate it. He felt Carla was watching over him. And it didn't matter that Colleen didn't say hello back, because in his heart he heard Carla say, "Hello, Bradley. It's a pleasure to see you today." He finished eating, then opened the book. "Guess what they've done now? They've wallpapered the garage. I told you they were crazy. Who ever heard of anybody putting wallpaper on the walls of a garage? Purple paper with yellow polka dots. I don't even know how they got in there. The garage has been locked shut for months. The lock was broken or something, so nobody could get in. At least, I'm glad they finally got it open. It was beginning to smell pretty bad. You could smell it from the driveway. Now it just smells like paste. I can't wait until my parents get home and put an end to all this craziness. Their trial is next week. They have to be found innocent. I mean, if they stole an elephant, I'd know about it, wouldn't I? Where could you hide an elephant?" "Look, he's reading," said Robbie. "I didn't know he knew how to read," laughed Curtis. Bradley looked up. He was surrounded by Jeff and his gang. "He can't read," said Brian. "He just looks at the pictures." They all laughed. "What you reading?" asked Russell. Bradley closed the book and slowly stood on the concrete steps. "Chicken chalkers," said Dan. Andy bounced a basketball. Bradley glanced behind him. Doug was blocking the door to the auditorium. "What's the matter, Bradley?" he asked. "Hey, Chalkers, what's the name of your book?" asked Robbie. He looked at his book, then stared defiantly at Robbie. "Let me see it," said Robbie. Bradley clutched it against his chest. No matter what, he wasn't going to let them harm Carla's book. "Aw, come on, Bradley, be a pal," said Robbie. "I just want to see it." Curtis chuckled. Robbie stepped up toward him. "You can't read anyway," he said. "Give it to me and I'll read it to you." He reached out and rested his hand on the book. Bradley jerked it away. "Uh-oh, I think he's getting angry," said Brian. "I just want to see it," said Robbie. Again, he reached for the book. Bradley held it under his left arm and against his chest. He made his right hand into a fist. Robbie backed away. "Jeff," he called. "Come on, Jeff, teach him a lesson," said Dan. Jeff stepped between Andy and Russell. "All right," said Curtis. "Hold on," said Andy. "Let him get off the steps." The boys backed up. Bradley, clutching his book, walked down the concrete steps to where Jeff was waiting. "Do you want me to hold your book, Bradley?" said Andy. Bradley glanced at him. "Don't worry," he said sincerely. "I won't hurt it." Bradley handed Andy the book, then looked back at Jeff. They stood on a patch of grass and dirt and faced each other. The bruise around Jeff's eye had turned brown with a greenish tint. Jeff raised his fists. The other boys formed a circle around them. "Come on, get him, Jeff," urged Brian. "Give him another black eye," said Russell. Bradley readied himself. He raised his fists in the air, then lowered them. He had an idea. "Hello, Jeff," he said. Robbie snickered. Jeff stared at him, wide-eyed. "Hello, Bradley," he replied. Bradley smiled. He held out his hand. Jeff smiled too. It was his first honest smile in a long time. He shook his best friend's hand. The other boys were dumbfounded. No one said a word. Andy finally broke the ice. "Do you like to play basketball, Bradley?" he asked. Bradley looked at him, bewildered. "I'm not very good," he said. "So? None of us are," said Jeff, patting him on the back. "Now we'll have even teams," said Robbie.